Hello, my name is Eamon Burke, and I'm going to be explaining a few of the things that make a difference between a good chef's knife and the rest of them. I'm going to be focusing on the knife that you use for most things in your kitchen, whether you call it a chef's knife or a Gyuto or you use Santoku or whatever you're using, specifically a knife that does 80 to 90% of everything you're going to be doing in a kitchen and needs to be able to do a lot, and really doesn't need to be holding you back. They come in a wide variety of styles and sizes, but what you're looking for is something kind of between these two. It could be, maybe you're a tall guy and you want a nice long knife, or you're smaller, or you have higher countertops and you need something smaller. It really doesn't matter as long as it's not little bitty or just so huge that it's unwieldy in your kitchen. The most important quality in a knife is the quality of the grind. The grind is the process of removing metal from a flat knife-shaped blank, whether it's been forged or cut out from a sheet, and turning it into an efficient cutting tool through a series of tapers and bevels all along the blade. A quick way to check for really serious grind problems is to sight down the heel of the knife and to look at the edge profile, see if you see any kind of waving or dipping or side to side or thinning or thickening of the edge bevel or any dead flat spots. All of that is a sign that the knife was either ground by somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing or somebody who doesn't really care. This is going to cause a problem because if the knife dips down at any point, when you're cutting food, it's going to end up not completing the cut on a skin of something, and you're going to end up where you think you're doing a really good job, and then you look down and all your food is attached to itself. It's important that the knife is ground thin behind the edge, because you don't need it to be super strong. You're not trying to attack anything with this knife except for some food on a wooden cutting board. So it doesn't have to be very beefy steel as long as it's good quality steel. That's not to say that it can't be thicker in the back. In fact, if it's a lot thicker in the back than it is up front but tapers properly, that can be the sign of a very, very well-made knife. It can help to complete cuts and to do a lot of the work for you by kind of pushing the food that's already been cut out of the way in a sort of wedging motion. You also want to check for any burrs, any sharp edges around the spine or the choil, this unsharpened portion of the heel here, or even in the handle. They can be really uncomfortable and they can cut your hand. If you do have a knife with burrs on the spine or on the choil here, you can just take a piece of wet, dry sandpaper. It doesn't really matter what grit, but around 400 works for me, and you just rub it back and forth until it smooths out to a point that it feels better for your finger. The second most important quality of the blade is the heat treat. The heat treat is the process by which a steel gets its performance characteristics. Unfortunately, there is no way to determine a steel's heat treat quality by looking at it or handling it. The only way to know is by using it extensively, sharpening it, and even then it may be iffy for your ability to tell how exactly something was heat treated. Now, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo out there about how different knives are heat treated, and they've been plunged into liquid nitrogen, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes not. But the only way to know that your knife has been heat treated well is to ask somebody who knows and you trust if the knife has been heat treated properly, and if they have a good reputation for that kind of thing. People typically heat treat their blades well. They'll keep doing it well, and they'll only do the steels that they know how to do really well. A common misconception, very common, about chef's knives is that they have to be full tang to be good. This is sort of a carryover from the days when knives were used to kill people, and if you're being attacked or if something's really impacting your knife, there's a chance that it could break off in the center of the handle by twisting sideways. This is why outdoor knives and hunting knives are made with strong, thick, full tangs. This is not important in a kitchen knife at all. It doesn't really matter. Some people like the way it feels or looks better, and that's fine. And even the balance better, that's fine too. But it's not a sign of a well-made knife. Unless you just love to sharpen your knives, the steel that you want in your all-rounder knife should be pretty hard, at least 61 on the Rockwell scale. This is by no means the only factor in determining whether or not a knife holds its edge, but a lot of the higher performance steels get their best performance out of being basically as hard as possible. Some steels get a little bit brittle at that point, but again, if you find somebody who has a reputable heat treat process, you're not going to have an issue with that because they're never going to heat treat it beyond what's going to perform well. The other important thing to look for that's a very personal choice is tip placement. when you're looking at the profile of a knife, the overall silhouette, where the tip is in relation to the handle is the important factor in determining whether or not you like where the tip is or not. It doesn't really matter where the tip is in relation to the heel or the spine or whatever, because that's not what's actually going to be in relationship with the tip. Your hand is. If you have a really big knife with a really high tip, like you see on a lot of cheaper knives and some of the old-fashioned German knives, it's hard to get to the tip of the knife on the board, especially if the board is higher, without lifting your elbow way up, and it can make the knife seem a lot bigger and more unwieldy than it is. People like the tip in all different places, but I like mine right about in line with the bottom of the handle. I find that that's just the most natural place for me to put the tip on the board. There are a lot of factors that go into picking your main knife that you're going to be cooking with, but those are just some of the big points that I see all the time. I can look on the internet and a lot of knives I'll just throw right out because the profile is just so extreme, or because they're bragging about the thick, beefy tang in the handle, or they're just throwing a lot of nonsense out there about exactly what the composition of the steel is. None of that stuff really matters. If you just look for a knife that has a nice, gentle, sweeping curve to the profile, with a good grind and with reputable heat treat, it feels good in your hand. If you get the opportunity to hold one, you should be fine. A lot of the more reputable retailers have good return policies, and if you buy one and you take it home and you hate it, they'll typically work with you on something, so don't be afraid to look for a really good knife. And once you find the right all-rounder knife for you, you think you'll be surprised with the amount of things that you'll be able to do with just that one knife. So now you know, so go cook something.